I have a warning for you. Don't watch this alone. Seriously, if you've seen shows like Welcome to Derry and you think you understand small-town horror, you need to understand something first. Those stories have monsters. Pennywise, demons, otherworldly creatures. This town didn't need one. Because this story, every terrifying part of it, really happened. This isn't fiction. This is a descent into what happens when an entire community decides someone doesn't belong. This is a story of a town that became the monster itself. Welcome to Lucan, Ontario. Even today, it looks like a picture postcard of rural life. A quiet farming town, snow-covered roads that crunch under your feet in the winter. The gentle sound of church bells echoing on a Sunday morning. Neighbors who smile and wave as you pass by. Neighbors who know your name, know your family, know your business. Neighbors who remembered everything. And back in the mid-1800s, this seemingly peaceful town welcomed a new family. A family that would unknowingly sign their own death warrant the moment they arrived. They were called the Black Donnellys, and from the second they set foot in Lucan, the town, with its smiling faces and watchful eyes, decided they didn't belong. It wasn't a quiet dislike. It was a seed of hatred that would grow in the dark, watered by whispers and rumors, until it blossomed into something truly monstrous. The Donnellys weren't what you'd call model citizens, but who was back then? They were poor Irish immigrants who had escaped the famine, looking for a piece of land and a new life. They were fiercely independent, outspoken, and maybe a little rough around the edges. In a town built on conformity and quiet tradition, they were different. And being different was their first crime. Rumors started to follow them almost immediately, sticking to their name like mud. They were violent. People whispered over fences. They were criminals. People said in the general store. They were dangerous, a threat to the good, God-fearing people of Lucan. But here's the thing. No one could ever really prove it. Sure, there were fights and arguments, but this was the frontier. Fights were as common as barn raisings. Yet, for the Donnellys, every transgression, real or imagined, was magnified. It became part of their myth, a myth the town was writing for them. Soon, children were warned in hushed, serious tones. Don't go near the Donnellys' land. You stay away from that family. The name itself was becoming a curse. It didn't take long for that curse to demand a price. The first blood was spilled over something as old as humanity itself, land. The Donnellys were squatting on a piece of property, a common practice at the time, but a man named Patrick Farrell claimed it was his. The dispute festered, turning from angry words to a full-blown brawl at a logging beat. In the chaos, Farrell was struck and later died, and James Donnelly, the patriarch of the family, was blamed. He was hunted, captured, and convicted of manslaughter. The town finally had something concrete, a brand they could burn into the family's reputation forever. When James eventually returned from prison, a changed man by some accounts, the town no longer saw a person. They didn't see a father, a husband, or a neighbor. They saw a symbol of everything they feared and hated, a monster in their midst. And symbols, unlike people, are much easier to destroy. After James's return, the atmosphere in Lucan shifted. The open hostility was replaced by something colder, something that lurked in the shadows. The whispers started taking on a more sinister, almost supernatural tone. Neighbors began reporting strange things happening around the Donnelly farm. Lights were seen burning late into the night, long after every other house in the township was dark. People swore they saw shadowy figures moving across the fields at night, darting between the trees at the edge of the Donnelly property. Some claimed to hear the faint sounds of arguments carrying on the wind, even when no one was visible. Children, with their unfiltered perception, told even more chilling tales. They said they saw figures standing near the Donnelly house, sometimes for hours, not trying to get in, not shouting or causing trouble, just standing there, watching, waiting. The town wasn't just observing them anymore, it was haunting them. The years passed, and the line between man and myth, between rumor and reality, completely blurred. The hatred for the Donnellys grew into a kind of local folklore. They became the scapegoats for everything that went wrong in the Biddulph township. A barn burns down. Must have been the Donnellys. A fight breaks out at the tavern. A Donnelly must have started it. Someone's livestock goes missing. Blame the Donnellys. There was never any evidence. No proof that could stand up in a court of law. Only stories. Only whispers. But in Lucan, stories were more powerful than facts. They were the currency of the community, and the Donnellys were bankrupt. The town had tried the law once with James, and in their eyes, it had failed. He had come back. This time, they wouldn't make the same mistake. The community was drawing a line in the sand, and the Donnellys were on the wrong side. By the winter of 1880, something fundamental changed. It was a cold, bitter winter, the kind that freezes the ground solid and keeps people locked in their homes. But something else was freezing over. The hearts of the people of Lucan. The whispers in the dark began to quiet down. The sideways glances in the street hardened into open, undisguised glares. A secret society, a so-called vigilance committee, had been formed. Its members were neighbors, friends, and churchgoers. They were the pillars of the community, and they had made a decision, a final solution to what they called the Donnelly problem. They weren't going to call the law. They weren't going to wait for a judge or a jury. That night, they decided to become the law. They became the judge, the jury, and the executioner. What happens next is the culmination of decades of fear and hatred, a night of violence so brutal it has stained the history of this land forever. And we're going to take you right into the heart of that darkness. It was February 4th, 1880. In the small town of Lucan, Ontario, a mob was forming, quietly. Dozens of men, some say as many as 60, gathered in the dead of winter. Their faces were covered, their voices low and muffled. From behind frosted windows, children watched as their own fathers slipped out into the cold, dark night. No one tried to stop them. They all knew where they were going. The target was the Donnelly farm. This family, the Black Donnellys, were Irish immigrants who had a reputation. They were accused of everything from petty theft to arson to assault. To some in the community, they were a plague. To others, they were just a family trying to survive in a harsh new world. But on this night, none of that mattered. A line had been crossed. The town had decided it was time for the Donnellys to go, permanently. This group of men, they weren't just a random mob. They were a self-proclaimed vigilance committee, led by the local constable, James Carroll. They saw themselves as bringing justice where the law had failed. In their minds, they were the heroes of this story, ridding their peaceful town of a lawless menace. They carried clubs, iron bars, and a chilling sense of purpose. As they marched through the snow towards the Donnelly homestead, the only sound was the crunch of their boots and the pounding of their own hearts. They were on a mission, and nothing was going to stand in their way. Just before midnight, the mob surrounded the Donnelly farmhouse. The night air was shattered by the sound of breaking glass as windows were smashed in. The front door was forced open with a splintering crash. Inside, the Donnelly family, James, Johanna, their son Tom, and their niece Bridget, were startled from their sleep. There was no time to react, no chance to defend themselves. The scene that unfolded was one of pure, unrestrained brutality. The family members were dragged from their beds. They were beaten mercilessly with clubs and farm tools. The violence was swift and savage. James, Johanna, and Tom were killed inside their own home, the place they had built with their own hands. Bridget, their niece, was also slain. The attackers showed no mercy, not to the old, not to the women. But the mob wasn't finished. To cover their tracks, to erase every trace of what they had done, they set the house on fire. The wooden farmhouse, filled with the family's possessions and memories, went up in a blaze. The flames licked at the winter sky, a horrifying beacon in the darkness. Screams echoed across the snow-covered fields, but no one came to help. The neighbors, The people who had shared this land with the Donnellys for years either stayed in their homes or joined the mob. That night, the community of Lucan became a silent accomplice to a massacre, and it wasn't over. A few miles away, another group of vigilantes broke into the home of William Donnelly. They were looking for his brother, John Donnelly, who was staying there. They found him in his bed. They shot him point blank, in front of his brother and his brother's wife. 5 members of the Donnelly family were dead in a single night. The message was brutal and clear, but the killers made a mistake. They thought they had silenced everyone. They were wrong. Hiding in the farmhouse, terrified, was a young boy. Johnny O'Connor, a 12-year-old farmhand who worked for the Donnellys, had been sleeping in the house that night when the mob burst in. Justice, but one of the most brazen cover-ups in Canadian history. 2 separate trials were held for the murders. Key figures from the mob, including Constable James Carroll, were put on the stand. The prosecution had eyewitnesses, including young Johnny O'Connor, who bravely recounted the horrors he had seen. But something strange started to happen. The town of Lucan closed ranks. A wall of silence descended. Witnesses who had initially talked to police suddenly developed amnesia on the stand. Their testimonies changed. They couldn't recall seeing anything. Evidence seemed to vanish into thin air. Local newspapers, initially outraged, began to print stories painting the Donnellys as devils who got what they deserved. The narrative was shifting. It wasn't about the murder of a family anymore. It was about a community cleansing itself. The jury, made up of local men, listened to the conflicting stories. On one side, a terrified boy and the grieving survivors. On the other, an entire town swearing they saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. The pressure was immense. Children were warned to stay away from the old Donnelly land, but the warning had changed. It was no longer about the Black Donnellys. It was about something else, something that lingered in the soil, in the air, a darkness that the town had unleashed and could not put back. Was it a supernatural curse? Or was it the heavy weight of guilt, a collective conscience so poisoned that it began to rot the town from the inside out? The silence they had used as a shield had become their prison. So what's the real horror story here? Is it about a ghostly curse or a haunted piece of land? No. The final chilling truth of the Donnelly massacre is far more mundane and far more terrifying. This wasn't about ghosts or demons. This was about people. It was about what happens when an entire community decides to hate one family so much that they justify murder. It was about neighbors turning on neighbors and the law looking the other way. The real monster wasn't some supernatural entity. The monster was the man who lived next door. The monster was the silence of a town that agreed to forget. The story of the Donnellys is a stark reminder that the most terrifying things in this world don't come from a horror movie. They come from us. They come from our capacity for hatred, our fear of the other, and our willingness to bury the truth, no matter the cost.